Cookies. So the other piece of HTTP that is a really important design decision that turned out to have ramifications both good and bad is that it is a stateless protocol. What that means very simply is that every HTTP request is completely independent of every other request, even to the same server. So every time your web browser makes a connection to Google, let's say, or Amazon, it is the same as the first time it ever did it, with one teeny tiny exception. The very first time that you ever visit a server, the server can include, as part of those headers, remember we saw an example of HTTP replies, just like a request, there's a bunch of headers at the beginning with some metadata in them. One possible header is set cookie, which is a message back to the client saying, here is a random string that looks like garbage to you, but please hold on to it. And every time you come back to the site, please pass it back to me. Essentially, the interpretation of that string and how it's constructed is typically entirely up to the server. In most cases, it's impossible for the client to sort of meaningfully interpret it in any way, but the client is responsible for making sure that that gets sent back to that same server whenever that same server is visited again. That is, of course, until you tell your browser, please destroy the cookies related to the server, which is why when you do that, the next time you visit it, it's like you're visiting it for the first time in your life. And by the way, if you're using a private mode or incognito mode window, the only real difference is that while you're within that window, the cookies are being correctly sent back to the server. But as soon as you quit the browser, all of the cookies that were related to the incognito window are incinerated. So it's basically a way to allow you to have a session where during the session, the cookies are used to identify you. But as soon as your session is over, those cookies are burned up forever. So we can do a little bit of a cookie demo. What we can do in this case is I'm going to do a first time ever visit to google.com. And I'm not going to show the output. I'm just going to show the headers so we can see the set cookie. Put the headers into a file that we can look at. And then I'm going to send the output from this to the Bitbucket. Okay. By the way, for those of you not familiar with the Unix world, sending something to a file called dev-null sends it into oblivion. It doesn't get saved anywhere. So this was a way of saying, I don't care about the content. I just care about the headers, which we can now look at in this file. So this was google.com's reply. And if we scan down a little bit, sure enough, there's a set cookie, right? So all of this text following set cookie is what the browser is now responsible for remembering. By the way, you can set multiple cookies, and it looks like Google is doing that in this case. So anytime the browser is now going to contact the same server, it needs to include in every request a header that says cookie : and then the value that the server sent back. And typically, each time you do a request, the server will modify the value of the cookie. That's one of the ways that the server sort of keeps track of what's going on in your session. Right? So that's the world's simplest example of cookies. By the way, a fun fact about how cookies got their name. There's a sort of a classic meaning of the cookie that comes from one of the earliest text adventure games. The original text adventure where you say go north and you get back, oh, you're next to a stream, and then you basically, it's an entirely text-based interaction. One of the artifacts of that game is a magic cookie, which is a cookie that you cannot eat, but later on you have to present the cookie as a way of being able to get something done or achieve some goal in the game. So in sort of Unix hacker culture, magic cookie came to be something that it's a piece of data that the client cannot meaningfully interpret, but that you have to have it around because later you're going to need to present it in order to do something. And so Lou Montulli, who was one of the original developers of Netscape Navigator, when they sort of proposed this extension that would allow sessions by having cookies as part of HTTP, he was the person who decided that it should be named cookies because that was sort of an established usage of that word. So that's why they're called cookies and not something else. Plus, I think it's just fun to, names like cookies say something about the people who wrote the programs.